I spent 11 months fighting to adopt my daughter, so when a system glitch forced me to share custody with a total stranger, I swore I would never share my kid. Enter Dr. Vivienne Ashford, an icy, wealthy surgeon who was everything I wasn't. We were supposed to be rivals. I was fully prepared to hate her, but then she started looking at me differently, and one whispered secret changed everything. The caseworker had the nerve to look apologetic, which meant the news was about to be very, very bad. Laurel Vance sat in the stiff-backed chair across from the county office desk, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her best blazer pressed and buttoned. She had dressed for a fight, the way she dressed for every fight since she turned 26, and decided that the world owed her foster daughter a better story than the one she had been handed. The caseworker, a tired woman named Denise with glasses that kept slipping down her nose, slid a manila folder across the desk. "There's been a clerical error," Denise said slowly, the way people say things when they know the word is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Laurel did not touch the folder. Clerical errors don't usually result in two families being told they've both been approved to adopt the same child. "No, they usually don't." "Then explain it to me like I'm 5, Denise." Denise sighed and pulled off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The system flagged a duplicate match. It happens when a child's file gets entered twice, or when two different home study agencies process overlapping paperwork. In this case, it looks like your application and another applicant's application were both approved for a little girl named Maya Whitfield. Neither of you was told about the other. Laurel's jaw tightened. And whose bright idea was it to run 2 parallel tracks without checking the database? That's what we're trying to figure out. The state has already assigned a supervisor to review the case, but in the meantime, we can't just unsay one of the approvals. That would violate the child's continuity of care, and frankly, it would open us up to a lawsuit from whichever family gets bumped. "So what exactly are you telling me?" Denise finally met her eyes. "I'm telling you that until the review is complete, you're going to have to share custody of Maya with the other approved parent." The words landed like cold water. Laurel blinked. "I'm sorry. You want me to co-parent a child I've never met with a woman I've never met? On the strength of a clerical error?" "Temporarily, yes. Temporarily is how every permanent disaster starts, Denise." The other woman had the decency to look miserable about it. "I know, it's not ideal. Not ideal is when the coffee machine breaks. This is something else entirely." Laurel pushed her chair back and stood, pacing the small office like a caged animal. She had spent 11 months getting here. 11 months of background checks, home inspections, financial disclosures, parenting classes, sleepless nights worrying about whether her one-bedroom apartment in Portland's Selwood neighborhood was too small, whether her income as an RN at Providence Hospital was too modest, whether her quiet, carefully ordered life could possibly be enough for a kid who had been shuffled through 3 foster homes in 4 years, and now some glitch in the system had decided that her future could be shared with a stranger. "When do I meet her?" Laurel asked, her voice steadier now. "The other parent." Denise checked her notes. "She's coming in this afternoon. Her name is Vivienne Ashford. She's a pediatric surgeon at Legacy Emanuel. She's been in the system for almost 2 years. Laurel stopped pacing. "A surgeon?" "Yes, of course she is." The irony was not lost on her. Laurel had spent her whole adult life proving she was good enough, stable enough, warm enough to be a mother. She had scraped together every certification, every reference, every dollar. And now the uni— First it decided to pair her with the kind of woman who probably had a house in the West Hills and a nanny on standby. The kind of woman who would look at Laurel's modest rental and see everything it wasn't. "I'll be here," Laurel said finally. 3 o'clock. I'll bring coffee." Denise looked relieved. "That's very civil of you." "I'm not civil, Denise. I'm just too tired to be anything else." She left the office with the folder tucked under her arm, the weight of it somehow heavier than it had any right to be. The afternoon sun was pale and thin, the way Portland sun always is in March. She sat on the steps of the county building and opened the file. Maya Whitfield, age 7. Dark hair, dark eyes, a gap-toothed smile and the single photo clipped to the front page. Loves dinosaurs, strawberry milk, and the color purple. In care since age 3. Her placement history read like a series of short, disappointing chapters, each one ending with the same quiet phrase, unable to maintain placement. Laurel traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. "Okay, Maya," she said to no one, to the wind, to the little girl who was not hers yet and maybe would never be. "I'm not going anywhere. You can count on that." At 3 o'clock, Laurel was back in the county building with 2 cups of coffee, one black and one with cream and sugar, because she had no idea what a pediatric surgeon drank, and she figured it was better to cover her bases. She sat in the same waiting room, watching the door, her knee bouncing with the kind of nervous energy she usually reserved for code blues. The woman who walked in at 3:07 was not what Laurel expected. Vivienne Ashford was tall, with dark hair twisted into a low bun, and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slouched in her life. She wore dark slacks and a charcoal coat that probably cost more than Laurel's monthly rent. Her face was composed, professional, almost cool, but her eyes were tired. Not the tiredness of a long shift either, the deeper kind, the kind that sat in a person's bones. "Ms. Vance?" She extended a hand, her grip firm and brief. "Dr. Ashford?" Laurel handed her the coffee with cream and sugar. "I didn't know what you'd want, so I guessed." Vivienne blinked, looking down at the cup like it had been handed to her by a magician. "That's very considerate. Thank you." They stood in the waiting room, 2 women with nothing in common except a little girl neither of them had met yet. The silence stretched like taffy. "I read your file," Laurel said finally. 2 years in the system? That's a long time. Approval processes are lengthy. I assume you read mine as well? I read enough to know you operate on children for a living and you still chose to foster. That tells me something. Vivienne's expression flickered, a crack in the marble. It tells you I have a stable income and a flexible enough schedule to accommodate a child's needs. It tells me you're serious, Laurel said quietly. That's all I meant. The door opened before Vivienne could answer. Denise appeared, holding the hand of a small girl with dark hair and a purple backpack. Maya looked up at the 2 women with the wary, calculating gaze of a child who had learned that adults were temporary. "Girls," Denise said, her voice gentle, "this is Lauren and Vivienne. They're both here to meet you today." Maya's eyes moved between them. She did not smile. "Hi, Maya." Laurel crouched down, putting herself at eye level. "I'm Laurel. I brought you something." She pulled a small plastic dinosaur from her coat pocket, a bright green triceratops she had bought 3 days ago. On the off chance that this moment would happen, she held it out, palm open, like an offering. Maya looked at the dinosaur, then at Laurel. Then, slowly, her small fingers closed around it. "Her name is Spike," Laurel said. Maya did not say thank you. She just held the dinosaur tightly and looked at Laurel like she was trying to decide if this was a trick. Vivienne watched the exchange without speaking. When Laurel glanced up, she caught something in the surgeon's eyes, a flicker of surprise maybe, or recognition, the same quiet understanding that Laurel had felt when she read the file. This was not a child who trusted easily, and earning that trust would take everything they had. "Would you 2 like to meet in the family room?" Denise asked. "We have an hour before Maya's transition appointment. You can get to know her a little, and then we'll figure out the logistics." Logistics. Laurel nearly laughed, as if any of this could be reduced to logistics. But she stood up, dusted off her knees, and smiled at Maya. "What do you say we go find out if they have any more dinosaurs in that room?" Maya looked at Spike, then back at Laurel. "Maybe," she said, which was more than Laurel had expected. They walked down the hallway, together, the 4 of them. A strange and broken little procession. Laurel could feel Vivienne's presence beside her, tall and silent, radiating a tension that matched her own. Neither of them knew what they were doing. Neither of them knew if this would work, but Maya was holding the dinosaur, and that was something. That was, Laurel thought, a start. The family activity room at the county office was exactly what Laurel had expected. Beige walls, a scuffed linoleum floor, and a plastic bin of toys had seen better decades. A small round table sat in the corner, surrounded by 4 chairs that didn't match. It looked less like a place for building families and more like a waiting room for something nobody wanted to wait for. Maya chose the chair closest to the window, the one with the best view of the parking lot. She set Spike on the table in front of her, arranged just so, like she was claiming territory. Laurel recognized the move. It was the same thing foster parents did when they walked into a new placement meeting, staking out the spot with the clearest exit. Denise settled into a chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. "So," she said, clasping her hands together, "let's talk about what the next few weeks look like." Vivienne sat down last, unfolding herself into the too small chair with a grace that made it look intentional. She crossed her legs at the ankle and placed her hands on the table, palms down, perfectly still. A surgeon's hands, Laurel thought. Steady, controlled. She wondered what it would take to make those hands tremble. "Here's where we are," Denise continued. "The state has flagged the duplicate approval for review. That takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how backed up the legal department is. During that time, Maya will need a stable placement. Both of your homes have been approved. Both of you have been cleared." She paused, looking between them. "So we need to figure out how this is going to work." Laurel spoke first. "I have a room ready. I've had it ready for months. Purple sheets, a bookshelf, a nightlight that projects stars on the ceiling." She caught herself, felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't meant to sound like she was pitching, but she was, wasn't she? Vivienne didn't look at her. "I have a similar setup. The room is furnished and waiting. I've taken the next month off from surgery to ensure I'm available for appointments and transitions." Denise nodded, making a note. "Both of you are clearly prepared. That's not the issue. The issue is that we have 1 child and 2 approved guardians. We need a plan." Maya picked up Spike and turned him over in her hands, examining the plastic belly as if it held the answers. She hadn't looked up once. "Alternating weeks," Vivienne said. The words came out flat, clinical, like she was reading from a chart. 1 week with each of us. Clean boundaries, clear expectations, minimal disruption to her school schedule. Laurel's stomach dropped. Alternating weeks. She'd done the math in her head on the drive over, hoping for something else. Something that didn't involve handing Maya back and forth like a shared toy. But she couldn't think of a better option, and she didn't want to be the one to object first, to seem difficult, to give Denise a reason to question her. "That could work," she said slowly. "But we'd need to coordinate. School, meals, her routines. Kids need consistency." "I agree." Vivienne's voice was still flat, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, that Laurel hadn't pushed back harder. "We can set up a shared calendar. I'll have my assistant send you the details." "Do you even know what she likes to eat?" Laurel asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She felt her face heat. It wasn't that she wanted to be combative, it was that Maya was sitting right there, watching them with those 2 alert eyes, and Laurel couldn't stand the idea of her becoming a scheduling entry. Vivienne's jaw tightened. "I know she likes strawberries. And dinosaur documentaries? I read her file, I've read it twice. That's not the same as knowing her." "No," Vivienne said quietly, "it's not." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Denise cleared her throat. "Why don't we start with something simple? Maya, sweetheart, is there anything you want to ask either of them?" Maya looked up then, her gaze moving between Laurel and Vivienne with the careful assessment of a child who had learned to read adults the way other kids learned to read picture books. She held up Spike. "Does he have to stay in one house?" she asked. "Or can he come with me? When I switch?" Laurel felt her heart crack open. "He can come with you, sweetheart. He's yours. He goes wherever you go." Maya nodded, processing this. Then she looked at Vivienne. "Do you have any dinosaurs at your house?" Vivienne blinked. For a moment she looked genuinely thrown, like the question had knocked something loose behind her careful facade. No," she said. "I don't. But I could get some. If you wanted." "That's okay." Maya's voice was small but steady. "Spike can be the one here, and maybe I can pick another one for your house. If you want." Something shifted in Vivienne's face. It was subtle, barely a movement of the muscles around her eyes, but Laurel saw it. She recognized it, because she felt it too. That fragile, terrifying thing, hope, offered by a 7-year-old holding a plastic dinosaur. I would like that, Vivienne said. Her voice was softer now, less clinical. I would like that very much. Denise smiled, writing something in her notebook. That sounds like a good start. Now about the practical details. They spent the next 40 minutes hashing out the logistics, school pickup. Since Laurel's shift at the hospital ended, the 3, and Maya's school dismissed at 2:45, Vivienne's assistant would handle the alternate weeks, and they'd both have the same emergency contacts. Denise made copies of the provisional custody agreement, one for each of them, and flagged the dates for the review hearings. Laurel tried to focus on the paperwork, but she kept stealing glances at Maya, who had started drawing on a piece of paper with a crayon from the bin. It was a picture of 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. All of them were holding hands. In the corner, she'd drawn a small green blob with a tail. That's Spike, she said, noticing Laurel looking. He's coming with us. She paused, then added, both of us. He'll have 2 homes now. 2 homes. Laurel swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, to promise that this would work, that Maya would never feel like a baton in a relay race nobody asked to run. But she didn't know if she could keep that promise. She barely knew Vivienne. She barely knew herself some days. Vivienne was the one who broke the silence. He'll have 2 homes, she said, her voice careful. And that means he'll have 2 people who care about him. That's not a bad thing, Maya. That's a good thing. Maya considered this, then nodded slowly. Okay, she said, as long as he doesn't have to sleep alone. He won't, Laurel said. I promise. We both promise, Vivienne added. They didn't look at each other when they said it, but for the first time that afternoon, their words landed in the same place. Laurel felt something shift in her chest, something she couldn't name. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. The meeting ended with Denise walking them to the front office. Maya was scheduled to start her transition the following Monday. Spenale, her first week with Laurel, then switching to Vivienne's. She'd bring Spike with her, and on Friday she'd pick out a second dinosaur for Vivienne's house. As they stood in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt, Laurel watched Vivienne get into a sleek black car that cost more than her annual salary. The woman paused before closing the door, looking back at Laurel with an expression she couldn't quite read. Monday, Vivienne said. I'll pick her up from school on Friday. You'll have her until then. I know the schedule, Laurel said, and she tried not to sound defensive. Vivienne nodded, her hand resting on the car door. I know you do. She paused, and something in her face softened. You're good with her. I saw that. Then she got in the car and drove away, leaving Laurel standing in the parking lot with a strange, buzzing feeling in her chest. She looked down at Maya, who was holding Spike with both hands, her small face turned up toward the sun. She's nice, Maya said. The tall one. She's just sad, I think. Laurel crouched down to Maya's level. What makes you say that? Maya shrugged, a small, serious movement. Sad people hold their shoulders tight, like they're carrying something heavy. She looked at Laurel. You do it too, but not as much as her. Laurel didn't know what to say to that, so she said the only thing that felt true. Maybe we can help her put it down sometimes, a little at a time. Maya considered this, then nodded. Okay, she said, but first we need to get ice cream. This is a big day, and Spike says he's never had ice cream before. Laurel laughed, surprised by the sound of it, surprised by how natural it felt. Spike is in for a treat then. Let's go. They walked to her car together, Maya's small hand slipping into hers without a word. It was the first time Maya had reached out like that, unprompted. Laurel held her breath, afraid that any sudden movement would break the spell. But Maya just walked beside her, swinging Spike gently, humming a song Laurel didn't recognize. The car was old and smelled faintly of coffee, and Maya buckled herself in with the practiced efficiency of a child who had done it too many times. Laurel watched her in the rearview mirror and felt something click into place. Not certainty, not yet, but a direction, a reason to keep going. She pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the ice cream shop on Division Street, trying not to think about Friday, about handing Maya over to the tall, sad woman with the surgeon's hands, trying not to think about the 4 weeks after that, when the state would decide which of them got to keep her. For now, there was ice cream, there was Spike. There was a child in her back seat humming a song about dinosaurs and new beginnings. For now, that was enough. The first thing Laurel learned about having a child in the house was that mornings started much earlier than she had ever thought possible. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:40 on Tuesday, still in her pajamas, Spike tucked under one arm. Her hair was a mess of tangles, and she looked at Laurel with the sleepy seriousness of someone who had important business to conduct. "Can I have cereal?" Maya asked. "The kind with the little marshmallows?" Laurel, who had been staring at the coffee maker with the desperate focus of a woman who needed caffeine before conversation, blooped. "I don't have that kind. I have oats and eggs and maybe some fruit that's seen better days." Maya considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing a verdict. "Oats are okay," she said finally, "but only if I can put honey on them." "Deal." They ate breakfast in the small kitchen, sunlight spilling across the worn linoleum. Laurel watched Maya stir her oats with exaggerated concentration, and something about the ordinary domesticity of it made her chest ache. She had spent the night before lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she had gotten herself into. But here was a child, eating oats, asking for honey. It was so unbearably normal that Laurel felt tears prick her eyes and had to turn away to hide them. "What are we doing today?" Maya asked, mouth full. Laurel took a breath and turned back. "I thought maybe we could go to the library, get you some books, and maybe pick up a few groceries for the week." "Can we get more dinosaurs?" Maya's eyes lit up. "For Spike's collection?" It was such a simple request, and yet Laurel felt the weight of it. This child was already planning, already building a home here, already trusting that she would stay for more than a week. "Sure," Laurel said, her voice rough. "We can get more dinosaurs." The library was a squat brick building on the corner of 5th and Main, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and floor wax. Maya walked ahead of Laurel with the confidence of a regular visitor, heading straight for the children's section in the back. "Do you like to read?" Laurel asked, catching up to her. Maya shrugged, running her fingers along the spines of picture books. "I like books about animals, and space, and dinosaurs, but I already have Spike, so I don't need to read about them as much." "That's very logical." "I'm a logical person," Maya said, and Laurel had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. They left the library with a stack of books about whales, the solar system, and one inexplicably about the history of chewing gum. Maya carried them all in a canvas bag that was nearly as big as she was, and Laurel watched her with a warmth that surprised her. It was on the way home that Maya asked the question Laurel had been dreading. "Does Miss Vivienne have a library too?" Laurel gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I don't know, she might. She lives in a bigger house than mine, so maybe she has more books. Is her house really big?" "I think so. I've never been inside it." Maya was quiet for a moment, her small face thoughtful in the rearview mirror. "Do you think she has a garden?" "I don't know, Maya. Maybe she has flowers. I like flowers. My first foster mom had flowers in her yard." Maya paused, then added, "She was nice, but she couldn't keep me because she was too old." The words landed like a punch to Laurel's stomach. "I'm sorry," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. Maya shrugged, the motion visible even from the back seat. "It's okay. People can't always keep you. That's just how it is." Laurel said nothing because she didn't trust her voice. That's just how it is. A child, not even 7 years old, accepting the impermanence of home like it was weather. Laurel had to blink hard to keep her eyes focused on the road. Tuesday passed in a blur of small moments. Maya helped Laurel water the few potted plants on the porch, and she was very serious about the task, asking which ones needed more water and which ones were okay. She ate a sandwich for lunch and declared it pretty good, but not as good as the ones from the deli. She took a nap in the afternoon with Spike clutched to her chest, and Laurel stood in the doorway of the guest room for a long time, just watching her breathe. On Wednesday, Laurel took Maya to the park. They sat on a bench and watched the ducks paddle around the small pond, and Maya asked a stream of questions that Laurel answered with increasing creativity. "Where did ducks sleep?" "In the water, I think." "Don't they get cold?" "They have feathers." "Oh." Maya considered this. "Feathers are good for that." A woman on the bench next to them smiled at Laurel. "Your daughter is adorable." Laurel opened her mouth to correct her, then closed it. The word daughter sat in her chest like a stone. She didn't know what Maya was, yet. Not her daughter. Not yet. But the correction felt like a betrayal somehow. "Thank you," Laurel said, and Maya looked up at her with a small, puzzled smile. On Thursday night, Laurel sat at the kitchen table after Maya had gone to bed and looked at the calendar she had pinned to the wall. Friday was circled in red pen, the day she would hand Maya over to a woman she barely knew, a woman who lived in a house with more rooms than Laurel's had windows. She had been trying not to think about it all week, but now it loomed, unavoidable. "Is that when I go to Miss Vivienne's?" Maya's voice came from the doorway, small and sleepy. Laurel turned. Maya was standing there in her pajamas, Spike dragging on the floor beside her. "I thought you were asleep." "I couldn't sleep." Maya shuffled closer and climbed into the chair next to Laurel without being invited. "Are you sad about tomorrow?" Laurel felt her throat tighten. "No, I'm not sad, I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About how much fun you'll have at Miss Vivienne's. She has a big house, and maybe she has a garden, and I bet she has really nice books." Maya looked at her with those two old eyes. "You could come too." "I can't, sweetheart. It's your week with her. That's the arrangement." "I know." Maya was quiet for a moment. "But you'll come get me, right, after the week is over?" "Of course I will. Friday next week, I'll be there." Maya nodded slowly. "Okay." She slid off the chair and stood there for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you a secret?" "Sure. I'm a little sad, too." And then she was gone, padding back down the hallway to her room, leaving Laurel at the kitchen table with a calendar and a heart that felt like it was about to split open. Friday morning arrived too quickly. Laurel helped Maya pack her small bag, folding each shirt with unnecessary care, adding Spike at the top where he could ride safely. They ate breakfast in near silence, and Maya's usual chatter was replaced by a quietness that made Laurel's chest ache. At 10 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. Laurel looked out the window and saw a sleek silver sedan, clean and gleaming in the morning light. The door opened and Vivienne stepped out. She was dressed in a simple gray dress with a light cardigan, and her dark hair was pulled back in a low knot. She looked uncertain in a way that Laurel hadn't seen before, her eyes scanning the small house with something that might have been nerves. Laurel opened the door before Vivienne could knock. "Hi," Laurel said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Hello?" Vivienne's gaze moved past her, to where Maya stood in the hallway with her bag at her feet. "Hi, Maya." "Hi, Miss Vivienne." Maya's voice was small. Vivienne knelt down, bringing herself to Maya's eye level. "I brought you something. It's in the car. Would you like to see it?" Maya looked back at Laurel as if asking permission. Laurel nodded, and Maya walked forward slowly, her hands slipping into Vivienne's without hesitation. Vivienne stood up, a whole stash to think for a moment. She and Laurel stood facing each other over the small child between them. "I'll take good care of her," Vivienne said quietly. "I know you will." Laurel said it and meant it, which surprised her. Maya looked back at Laurel one more time. "Bye, Laurel. I'll see you next Friday." "See you next Friday, sweetheart." And then they were gone. The silver car backing out of the driveway, leaving Laurel standing on the porch with her arms crossed and her heart somewhere in her throat. She went back inside and looked at the kitchen table, still covered in the crumbs of Maya's breakfast. The guest room door was open, the bed already made, Spike's accents leaving a hollow space on the pillow. The house was too quiet. Laurel sat down at the table and put her head in her hands, and for the first time in years, she cried. The first thing Vivienne noticed about her house was how much louder it was with Maya in it. She had never thought of the penthouse as silent. It was full of the hum of the city below, the soft churn of the elevator, the occasional distant siren. But those were background noises, the kind you stopped hearing after a year. Maya's presence was different. It was the thump of small feet on hardwood, the clatter of a cereal bowl set down too hard, the sound of a voice asking questions, endless questions, filling every corner of the space. "Vivienne, why is your couch so white?" Vivienne looked up from her laptop where she had been pretending to read a contract. Maya was standing in the middle of the living room, hands on her hips, wearing the pajamas Vivienne had bought her 2 days ago, a purple pair with tiny moons on them. "Because I like white," Vivienne said. "That's a dumb color for a couch. What if you spill something? Then I clean it. What if
I spill something red? I clean it faster." Maya considered this, tilting her head. It was the same expression Laurel had worn when Vivienne explained the foster care paperwork, and the resemblance startled her for a moment, a strange echo of a face she had only known for 3 weeks. "Laurel has a brown couch," Maya said. "You can't see the stains on it." "I'll keep that in mind." Vivienne closed her laptop. She had been waiting for this moment, the inevitable pause in the day when Maya ran out of things to do and started looking at her with that expectant, slightly wary expression she had prepared. She had bought a dinosaur, a small plastic one with a bendy neck and a tag that said it came from a museum gift shop. She had not told Laurel about it, because she was not sure why she had bought it, only that she had seen it in a window and thought of Maya. "Come here," she said. "I have something for you." Maya approached slowly, the way she did everything new. Vivienne reached into the bag beside the couch and pulled out the dinosaur. Holding it out, Maya's eyes went wide. "Is that a T-Rex?" "It's a brachiosaurus. They're the ones with the long necks." Maya took it carefully, turning it over in her hands like it might break. "It's for me?" "Yes." "Why?" The question caught Vivienne off guard. She had not prepared an answer for why. She had prepared for the dinosaur to be received, maybe even enjoyed, but not for the why, and the why sat in the air between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "Because I thought you might like it," Vivienne said. It was the truth, and also not the whole truth, and she let it stand. Maya looked at the dinosaur, then at Vivienne, and for a moment her face did something complicated. A flicker of something that looked almost like suspicion, and then it settled into a small, careful smile. "Thank you," she said. "Can I name him?" "You can name him whatever you want. I'm going to call him Gerald." "Why Gerald? Because Gerald is a good name for a dinosaur." Vivienne nodded, and that was that. Maya sat down on the floor with Gerald, examining him with the focused attention of a scientist, and Vivienne sat on her white couch and watched her, feeling something crack open in her chest that she had been trying very hard not to feel. In her small house, Laurel folded Maya's laundry. It was a ridiculous thing to do. The clothes were clean, they had been cleaned on Thursday, and Maya was not coming back for another week. But Laurel had found herself with nothing else to do, and the folding was a way of keeping her hands busy while her mind did its own slow spiral. She folded the dinosaur shirt Maya had worn on Tuesday, the one with the cartoon volcano on it. She folded the striped socks. She folded the pink cardigan that was getting too small, the one Maya had insisted on wearing even though it was too warm for it. She should not be doing this, she told herself. She was not Maya's mother. She was a licensed foster parent who had agreed to share custody with another licensed foster parent, and both of them were temporary. Both of them were placeholders until the state decided where Maya would go. But the folded clothes made a neat stack on the guest bed, and the guest bed was still made, and the guest room still smelled faintly like the strawberry shampoo Maya had used. Laurel sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the stack. She had not expected to feel this. She had expected to feel responsible, maybe even fond, the way you felt about a neighbor's dog you agreed to watch. She had not expected to feel like someone had reached into her chest and taken out a part of her she had not known was there. She thought about Friday, about the look on Maya's face when she had said goodbye. She thought about the way Maya had hugged her, quick and fierce, like she was afraid of being held too long. She thought about Vivienne, standing in the driveway with her perfect posture and her perfect car, looking at Laurel like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Laurel had not told Vivienne that she cried after they left. She had not told anyone. It felt like a confession, an admission that she was in deeper than she had agreed to be. She picked up the pink cardigan and folded it again, even though it was already folded. The house was too quiet. She had never noticed how quiet it was before Maya. Now she noticed it all the time. Friday came faster than either of them expected. Vivienne woke Maya early, made her pancakes, helped her pack the small bag she had arrived with, now supplemented by the dinosaur and a stuffed animal Vivienne had also bought, a gray elephant with floppy ears. She had not meant to buy the elephant either. It had happened the same way the dinosaur had happened, a window display, a thought of Maya, a purchase made before she could talk herself out of it. On the drive to Laurel's house, Maya was quiet in the back seat, holding Gerald in her lap. "Are you excited to see Laurel?" Vivienne asked. Maya nodded. Then, after a pause, "Are you going to miss me?" The question hit her like a small, sharp stone. "Yes," she said. "I will." "Good," Maya said.
I'd miss you too. Vivienne's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She did not trust herself to speak. When they pulled into Laurel's driveway, Laurel was already on the porch. She was wearing jeans and a faded blue thing sweater. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was trying very hard to look casual, like she had not been waiting by the window for the last hour. Maya unclipped her seatbelt and burst out of the car before Vivienne had even turned off the engine. "Laurel!" Laurel caught her in a hug, lifting her off her feet, and Maya laughed, a bright sound that made Vivienne's chest ache in a way she could not name. "Hi, sweetheart," Laurel said, her voice muffled against Maya's hair. "Hi, I brought Gerald." Maya held up the dinosaur. "Vivienne gave him to me. He's a brachiosaurus." "He's very handsome," Laurel said. She looked over Maya's head at Vivienne, and her expression softened, something passing between them that neither of them had words for. Vivienne got out of the car holding the gray elephant. "She also has this one," she said. "I didn't want her to get lonely." Laurel's eyes flicked to the elephant, then back to Vivienne's face. "You bought her two things?" "I bought her one thing, and then the other thing happened." "That's a lot of things for someone who said she wasn't sure about sharing custody." Vivienne opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She had no good answer for that. She had no answer at all, except that somewhere between Wednesday and Friday she had started to look forward to the sound of small feet on hardwood. Maya wiggled out of Laurel's arms and ran back to Vivienne, throwing her arms round her legs. The hug was quick, fierce, the same one she had given Laurel a week ago, and Vivienne froze, her hands hovering awkwardly above Maya's head. Then she lowered one hand and touched Maya's hair. "See you next Friday," Maya said, pulling back. "See you next Friday," Vivienne said. Maya ran back to Laurel, who took her hand and led her toward the house. At the door, Maya turned and waved. Then the door closed, and Vivienne was alone in the driveway. She stood there for a long moment, holding the gray elephant that had not been needed after all. The house in front of her was quiet, but she could hear Maya's laugh through the walls, a bright sound that seemed to follow her as she got back in the car. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at the house for a long time. She had not expected to feel this either. Chapter 5. The First Crack in the Armor. Text the week, without Maya, moved differently inside Laurel's house. The quiet was not the same quiet she had known before. It was louder somehow, filled with the absence of small shoes by the door and the sticky fingerprints that appeared on the kitchen counter no matter how many times she wiped them down. She found herself reaching for the dinosaur in the evenings. It sat on the coffee table where Maya had left it, a plastic creature with painted-on scales and a unbent leg. Laurel picked it up on Tuesday night and turned it over in her hands. Maya had not brought it to school. She had insisted it stay home, so you won't be lonely while I'm gone. That was the thing about Maya. She noticed everything. She noticed when Laurel's shoulders were tight after a long shift at the clinic. She noticed when Laurel had not eaten dinner. And now, apparently, she had noticed that Laurel might need a dinosaur to keep her company. Laurel set the dinosaur back down and reached for her phone. She had been doing that too, reaching for it without knowing why. There was no reason to call Vivienne. The next pickup was Friday. The schedule was clear. They had exchanged numbers at the first handoff, but the only texts between them were short and practical. Running 5 minutes.
Fentanyl there. Maya forgot her jacket. I'll bring it Friday. Nothing more. But on Wednesday night, after a patient had come in with a panic attack and Laurel had sat with her for an extra 20 minutes just holding her hand, she found herself typing a message before she could stop herself. How was she doing? She stared at the words. They were too vague, too much like a door opening. She added, "Maya? Is she okay?" The reply came faster than she expected. "She's fine. She asked if you're eating dinner." Laurel's throat tightened. She typed back, "Did you tell her yes?" There was a pause. Then, "I told her I'd make sure of it." Laurel laughed out loud, a short, surprised sound that echoed in her empty living room. She could picture Vivienne saying that, straight-backed and serious, as if ensuring Laurel ate dinner was a professional obligation she intended to fulfill. "Thank you," she typed. "You're welcome," came the reply. She put the phone down, then she picked it up again. You bought her the elephant. Another pause, longer this time. I did. Why? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Laurel watched them the way she imagined people watched lightning bugs in summer, waiting for the glow. Because she told me the gray one looked like the sky before rain. I thought she should have something that reminded her of home. Laurel read the message 3 times. Something about it cracked open a small space in her chest, a place she had been keeping carefully sealed. On Friday, Laurel arrived at Vivienne's building 20 minutes early. She sat in her car for a while, watching the glass tower rise into the pale afternoon sky. She had brought Maya's favorite blanket, the one with the faded stars, and a box of the crackers Maya liked from the corner store near her. Healths. She had also brought something else, a list of questions she had been writing all week, questions about school enrollment and medical records and what Maya liked to eat for breakfast. The list was long, but when the doorman let her into the lobby, Laurel folded it in half and put it in her pocket. She wanted to see Vivienne first. She wanted to see how she was, not just how the logistics were going. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened on the top floor, Laurel saw the door to the apartment already ajar, and she could hear Maya's voice inside, chattering about something. And then another voice, lower, answering with a patient rhythm that sounded almost unfamiliar. It took Laurel a moment to realize it was Vivienne telling Maya a story, not reading from a book, just telling one, making it up as she went along. And then the elephant looked at the dinosaur and said, "If you keep stomping like that, you'll wake the moon." "But the moon doesn't sleep during the day," Maya's voice said. "In the story, the moon sleeps whenever it wants to," Vivienne said. "It's that kind of moon." Laurel stood in the doorway. She could see them now, Vivienne on the floor, her tailored gray trousers dusted with what looked like goldfish crumbs, Maya beside her with the gray elephant tucked under one arm. The white sofa behind them was still immaculate, but there was a small plastic teacup on the glass coffee table, and next to it, a half-eaten cracker. Vivienne looked up and saw her. For a moment, something flickered across her face, something unguarded. Then it was gone, replaced by that composed expression Laurel had come to recognize. "You're early," Vivienne said. "Traffic was light." Laurel stepped inside. Maya looked up and broke into a grin. "Laurel, did you buy?" "Think the crackers?" "I did." Laurel held up the box. "And the blanket. I thought you might want it for tonight." Maya scrambled to her feet and took the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders like a cape. Then she turned to Vivienne. "Can Laurel stay for a little bit? I want to show her my room." Laurel looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked at Laurel. "I don't see why not," Vivienne said slowly. Maya grabbed Laurel's hand and pulled her down the hall, chattering about the dinosaur and the elephant and how Vivienne had let her draw on a piece of paper with a fancy pen that cost more than a car. Laurel let herself be pulled, laughing, glancing back once to see Vivienne standing in the living room, watching them with an expression she could not quite read. Maya's room at Vivienne's apartment was different from her room at Laurel's house. There was a proper bed with a star-shaped pillow, a small bookshelf filled with picture books, and a window that looked out over the city. But the dinosaur sat on the nightstand, and the gray elephant was already in Maya's arms. "It's nice here," Laurel said. "Yeah," Maya said. "She's not as scary as she looks." Laurel blinked. "Who?" "Vivienne. She's really nice. She just forgets to smile sometimes." Laurel knelt down and helped Maya adjust the blanket around her shoulders. "I think you might be right about that." When they came back to the living room, Vivienne was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She turned when she heard them. "Thank you for staying," she said. And it sounded, Laurel thought, like she meant it. "I should go," Laurel said. "I'll pick her up Sunday evening?" "Saturday morning, actually. I have a board meeting, but I'll be free by noon." Laurel pulled out her phone to check. "Saturday noon works. I'll bring her the park near my place if the weather holds." Vivienne nodded. Then she hesitated. Laurel paused at the door. "I wanted to ask you something." Laurel turned. Vivienne was standing very straight, her hands clasped in front of her. Maya had wandered back toward her room, leaving them alone in the soft afternoon light. "How do you do it?" Vivienne asked. The words came out slowly, like she had been holding them for a long time. "How do you let her go every week and not feel like you're losing something?" The question hung in the air between them. Laurel felt her own breath catch. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think I just tell myself that she's not being taken away. She's being shared. And every time she comes back, she has more to love, not less."
Vivienne looked down at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were brighter than before. That's a generous way to see it. It's the only way I can survive it, Laurel said softly. Vivienne nodded slowly, and for a moment, the distance between them felt smaller than it had ever been. I'll see you Saturday, Laurel said. Saturday, Vivienne repeated. Laurel walked out of the apartment and down the hall to the elevator. She pressed the button and stood there, her heart beating a little faster than it should have been. She had not lied to Vivienne, but she had not told her the whole truth either. The whole truth was that letting Maya go every week was the hardest thing she had ever done, and the whole truth was that she was starting to feel something for Vivienne that had nothing to do with Maya at all. The elevator doors opened. Laurel stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. When she got to her car, she sat for a long time without starting the engine. Then, she pulled out her phone and penned their text thread. I'm glad I stayed, she typed. She stared at the words, then she deleted them and typed something else. Thank you for telling her stories. She hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came 3 minutes later. She asked me to. I didn't know how to say no. Laurel smiled and put the phone down. The engine turned over with a soft hum, and she pulled out of the parking lot with the afternoon sun warm on her face. She was still smiling when she got home. On Saturday morning, Laurel arrived at the park with a blanket and 2 cups of coffee. Maya was already running toward the playground, and Vivienne was standing by the swings with her hands in the pockets of her coat. I brought you coffee, Laurel said, holding out the cup. Vivienne took it. Their fingers brushed briefly. Neither of them pulled away right away. Thank you, Vivienne said. She looked at the cup, then at Laurel. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Vivienne sipped the coffee. Then she looked out at Maya, who was climbing the slide with a determined look on her face. She's going to be okay, isn't she? Vivienne asked. Laurel followed her gaze. Yes, she said. She's going to be more than okay. She's going to be loved. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, I think she already is. They watched Maya play in the morning light. 2 women who had started as strangers standing side by side, learning to share something neither of them had planned for. Sunday mornings at Vivienne's house had developed a quiet rhythm that Laurel had stopped questioning. She arrived at 9 with a box of pastries from the bakery on Chestnut Street. Vivienne made coffee in the expensive machine that beeped twice before it poured. Maya sat at the kitchen island with her dinosaur toy, narrating a complicated adventure involving a volcano and a very brave triceratops named Brenda. It felt almost domestic. Laurel caught herself thinking the word and immediately pushed it away. Miss Laurel, do you have a house? Maya asked, mid-bite of a croissant. I do, Laurel said. A small one, about 20 minutes from here. Do you have a room for me? The question landed like a stone in still water. Laurel glanced at Vivienne, who had gone very still by the coffee machine. I have a guest room, Laurel said carefully. It has a bed and a lamp and a bookshelf. Maya considered this. Can I see it sometime? Sure, Laurel said, her voice lighter than she felt. Sometime. Vivienne set the coffee cup down with a soft click. Maya, do you want to show Laurel the drawing you made in art class? The distraction worked. Maya slid off the stool and ran toward her room. The kitchen fell quiet, and Laurel found herself looking at Vivienne, who was looking at the counter with an expression Laurel couldn't quite read. She's getting attached, Vivienne said quietly. We all are, Laurel said. Vivienne's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but the doorbell rang first. The woman on the porch was in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun and a clipboard in her hand. She wore a navy blazer and sensible shoes, and her smile was professional in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Ashford, she said, I'm Carol Jensen from the State Foster Care Review Board. We have a scheduled home visit today at 10. Vivienne's face flickered. I thought the visit was next month. Apologies for the confusion, Carol said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The review was moved up. There's been a backlog. And we're prioritizing placements with dual guardianship arrangements. Laurel felt the words land like cold water. Dual guardianship. She was standing in the kitchen of a woman she had met 6 weeks ago, holding a box of pastries, while a state official assessed their fitness as co-caregivers.
The absurdity of it pressed against her chest. "Ms. Jensen, I'm Laurel," she said, stepping forward. "I'm Maya's other foster parent. We weren't informed of the reschedule." Carol's eyebrows rose slightly. Yes. The co-parenting arrangement, that's actually something I'd like to discuss today. The state is interested in how cooperative placements are functioning. Maya appeared at the end of the hallway, dinosaur in hand. "Miss Laurel, did you know that Brenda can fight a volcano?" The tension in the room shifted. Carol's gaze moved to Maya, and something in her professional smile softened by a fraction. "And who is Brenda?" "Brenda is a triceratops," Maya said seriously. "She's not afraid of anything." Vivienne moved to stand beside Laurel. Their shoulders were almost touching. Laurel could feel the warmth of her through the sleeve of her sweater. "Ms. Jensen," Vivienne said, "perhaps we could continue this discussion in the living room. Maya, sweetheart, why don't you show Brenda the garden?" "Okay." Maya ran toward the back door, and the sound of her footsteps faded into the yard. Carol settled onto the white sofa. Vivienne sat across from her, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Laurel hesitated for a moment, then sat beside Vivienne. Not too close, but close enough that their knees almost brushed. "I'll be honest with you both," Carol said, setting the clipboard on her lap. "The review board has some concerns about this arrangement. Two unrelated foster parents, Shari, think custody of one child is unusual. We want to ensure Maya's stability is the primary focus." "Her stability is our primary focus," Vivienne said. Her voice was cool, controlled. Laurel recognized the tone from their early interactions. It was the armor. "Our focus," Laurel added softly, and Vivienne's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. Carol made a note on her clipboard. "Can you describe your current arrangement?" Vivienne spoke first. "Maya spends weekdays with me and weekends with Laurel. We coordinate schedules. We share information about her school progress and medical appointments." "And how do you make decisions together?" The question hung in the air. Laurel realized with a sinking feeling that they had never explicitly discussed how they made decisions. They had simply been making them, one text message and phone call at a time. "Communications are open," Laurel said. "We consult each other on anything significant." "Anything that affects Maya's well-being," Vivienne added. "We both want what's best for her." Carol nodded slowly. "And how would you characterize your relationship with each other?" Laurel felt the question land in her chest. She could feel Vivienne's stillness beside her, the careful containment of a woman who had spent years building walls. "We're partners in this," Laurel said. The word felt too small and too large at the same time. "In caring for Maya." Vivienne said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "We're learning to be." Carol made another note. "The review board will also be conducting a follow-up interview with Maya next week. Standard procedure. She'll be asked about her living situation and her relationship with both of you." The implications settled like a weight. Laurel knew what that meant. 7-year-olds were honest in ways
Thinked could either strengthen or dismantle a placement. "May I ask a question?" Laurel said. Carol looked up. "Of course. How is Maya's perspective weighted in the review?" Carol set her pen down. "Her perspective is important," she said carefully, "but ultimately the board will assess the stability of the placement. And stability, in these situations, often comes down to the adults involved, whether they can work together effectively." The words hung in the air. Laurel understood what wasn't being said. The state was watching them, measuring them, waiting to see if this unorthodox arrangement would hold. The back door creaked open. Maya ran in, holding a handful of daisies. "Ms. Jensen, look! These are for you!" Carol's professional facade cracked into a genuine smile as Maya pressed the flowers into her hands. "Well, thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind." Laurel watched the exchange, her heart aching with something she couldn't name. This child, who had been through more instability than any 7-year-old should know, was offering flowers to the woman who held her future in a clipboard. Vivienne had gone very quiet. Laurel glanced at her and saw that her hands had unfolded. They were resting on her knees, open, vulnerable in a way Laurel had never seen before. Ms. Jensen, Vivienne said, her voice softer than Laurel had ever heard it. I want you to know that I didn't ask for this. I didn't plan for any of it. But I'm here, every day, and I'm not going anywhere. Laurel felt the words land somewhere deep in her chest. She realized in that moment that she had never heard Vivienne say anything so honest about her own commitment. Carol looked at Vivienne for a long moment. Then she looked at Laurel. And you? Laurel thought about the empty apartment. The guest room thing with the bed and the lamp and the bookshelf. The dinosaur toy she had bought on a whim, and now could not imagine her life without.
I didn't plan for this either, she said. But I'm here too, and I'm not going anywhere. Carol nodded slowly. She made one final note, then closed her clipboard. I'll be in touch about the follow-up interview with Maya. In the meantime, I'd recommend you two sit down and discuss your long-term plan for co-parenting. The board likes to see clear structure. She stood. Vivienne rose with her. Laurel followed. At the door, Carol paused. She looked at them, standing side by side in the doorway of the white house on the quiet street, a dinosaur toy visible on the kitchen counter behind them. You know, she said, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Most placements fail because the adults can't get out of their own way. You two seem to have figured something out. She didn't wait for a response. The door clicked shut behind her. The house was quiet. Maya had gone back to her room, humming a song Laurel didn't recognize. Laurel stood in the doorway looking at the empty street, feeling something shift inside her. So, Laurel said, turning to face Vivienne. Long-term plan? Vivienne's mouth almost twitched. It might have been the beginning of a smile. I suppose we need to have a conversation. I suppose we do. They stood in the hallway, the afternoon light filtering through the windows, and Laurel realized that they had crossed some invisible line. They were not just two women sharing custody of a child anymore. They were something else, something Laurel wasn't ready to name. Vivienne cleared her throat. Would you like to stay for lunch? The question was simple. It was also everything. I'd like that, Laurel said. Vivienne thanked once, then turned toward the kitchen. Laurel followed her, watching the way the light caught the silver in her hair, and thought about how strange it was that a state review board visit could feel like the beginning of something. The kitchen smelled like butter and rosemary. Laurel stood by the counter, watching Vivienne move through the space with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of doing things alone. She pulled a glass dish from the refrigerator, set it on the counter, and began slicing a loaf of bread with careful, deliberate strokes. You don't have to help, Laurel said, already reaching for the salad bowl. I'm capable of standing here and looking useful. Vivienne glanced at her, something almost playful flickering in her eyes. You're a guest. I'm not sure that's what I am anymore. The words hung in the air longer than Laurel intended. She busied herself with the tomatoes, rinsing them under cold water, feeling the heat creep up the back of her neck. Vivienne didn't respond right away, and Laurel wondered if she had overstepped. But then Vivienne said, quietly, No, I suppose you're not. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The lasagna went into the oven. The salad came together. Laurel found herself watching Vivienne's hands, the way they moved with such certainty, the silver ring on her right index finger catching the light. It was a small thing, but Laurel had never noticed it before. She wondered what it meant. Maya asked me about you, Vivienne said, not looking up from the table she was setting. Last night, before bed? Laurel's hands stilled. What did she ask? She wanted to know if you had a room here. The words landed softly, but Laurel felt them all the same. She thought about Maya's small face, the way she clung to both of them during the review, the desperate hope in her voice when she asked if she could visit Laurel's apartment. What did you say? Vivienne set down the last fork, finally meeting Laurel's eyes. I told her that we were still figuring things out, that we wanted to do what was best for her. That's not really an answer. No, but it's the truth. The oven timer beeped and Vivienne turned away to check the lasagna. Laurel watched her bend over the open door, the steam rising around her face, and thought about how strange it was that a woman so composed could look so uncertain in moments like these. They sat down to eat a few minutes later. The lasagna was perfect, rich and cheesy, the edges crisp in exactly the right way. Laurel told her so, and Vivienne's mouth curved into what might have been a genuine smile. My grandmother's recipe, Vivienne said.
She was the only person in my family who believed I could do anything. Did you believe her? Vivienne considered the question, fork hovering over the plate. Eventually. It took me a long time to understand what she meant. I thought she meant I could be successful, that I could be powerful. It wasn't until I was older that I realized she meant something simpler. What? She meant I could be loved. By someone who didn't have to love me. Laurel set down her fork. Her throat felt tight. That's a beautiful thing to say. It's a hard thing to learn. Vivienne's voice was quiet, almost distant. I'm still learning it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Laurel wanted to ask more, wanted to know who had taught Vivienne that lesson. What had made it so hard to learn? But she sensed the boundary. This was not the time. Maybe it would never be the time. Carol said Maya will
I have her own interview, Laurel said instead. Vivienne nodded, her expression shifting back to something more practical. Next Thursday. They'll ask her about her experience in both placements. About how she feels about the arrangement. She's 8 years old. How is she supposed to articulate that? She's more perceptive than we give her credit for. Vivienne set down her fork, folding her hands on the table. But we can help her. We can make sure she knows that whatever she says, it won't change how we feel. How do we do that without influencing her answer? Vivienne was quiet for a long moment. I think we tell her the truth. That we're not going anywhere, that whatever she needs to say, she can say it. And then we trust her. Laurel thought about Maya's face, the way she looked between them during the review, the way she reached for both of their hands. She thought about how easily a child could internalize the pressure of a question like that, how she might try to say what she thought the adults wanted to hear. She's going to be scared, Laurel said. Yes. Vivienne's voice was gentle, but she'll also know that she's not alone. That's more than most children in her position ever get. Laurel looked at her across the table, the silver in her hair, the softness around her eyes that had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of control and composure. She realized suddenly that she had stopped seeing Vivienne as the imposing figure she'd first met. She was just a woman who had chosen, for reasons Laurel still didn't fully understand, to open her home and her heart to a child she didn't have to love. Can I ask you something? Laurel said. Vivienne's eyes met hers. You can ask. Why did you do this? Why did you become a foster parent? The question hung between them, heavy and honest. Vivienne looked down at her plate, and for a moment Laurel thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice low. I had a plan for my life. A very specific plan. Career, success, a certain kind of future I'd been building toward since I was young. She paused. And then one day I realized I didn't want any of it. I didn't know what I wanted instead. But I knew I couldn't keep going the way I was. Laurel waited it. I took a leave of absence, told my board I needed time. They thought I was having a breakdown. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Maybe I was. But then I saw Maya's file, a little girl who had been moved 3 times in 2 years because no one could make it work. And I thought, I can do this. I can be present for one child. Even if I can't figure out my own life, I can be there for hers. That's not nothing, Laurel said softly. No, Vivienne met her eyes. It's not nothing. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. They cleared the dishes together, moving around each other with an ease that felt natural, unforced. When Laurel reached for the same plate at the same time as Vivienne, their hands brushed, and neither of them pulled away immediately. I should go, Laurel said, though she didn't move. Vivienne nodded. I'll walk you out. They stood on the front porch, the late afternoon air cool against Laurel's skin. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like a held breath. Laurel turned to say goodbye and found Vivienne already looking at her. Thank you, Vivienne said, for staying, for being here. Where else would I be? Vivienne's expression shifted, something unreadable passing through her eyes. I don't know, but I'm glad you're here, Laurel felt. The words settle into her chest, warm and undeniable. She wanted to say something, wanted to find the words that would match the weight of what she was feeling, but nothing felt big enough. I'll see you Thursday, she said instead. Thursday, Vivienne repeated. We'll pick her up together. Together, Laurel echoed. She walked to her car, feeling Vivienne's gaze on her back the whole way. When she reached the driver's door, she looked back. Vivienne was still standing on the porch, one hand raised in a small wave. Laurel waved back, then got in the car and drove away, carrying the warmth of the afternoon with her. That night, she lay in bed and thought about what Vivienne had said about being loved by someone who didn't have to love her. She thought about Maya, who had no reason to trust either of them, and yet had chosen to. She thought about the Thursday interview and all the ways it could go wrong. And she thought about Vivienne's hand against hers in the kitchen, brief and electric, a question neither of them had answered yet. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray light that made everything feel muted and significant. Laurel woke before her alarm, her stomach already tight. She lay in the dark for a moment, running through the questions the social worker might ask Maya, the ways a 9-year-old could stumble, the ways an interview could go sideways despite every good intention. She dressed slowly, choosing a soft blue sweater she knew made her look approachable. Then she drove to Vivienne's house, because that was what they had agreed on, together. Vivienne opened the door before she could knock. She was wearing a dark blazer over a simple white short, her hair pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested she had been ready for an hour. There was a tight finesse around her eyes that Laurel had never seen before. "You're early," Vivienne said. "So are you." Vivienne's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I don't like being late," I noticed. Laurel stepped inside, and the warmth of the house wrapped around her. "Have you eaten? I made coffee." "That's not breakfast." "It's Thursday." Laurel walked past her into the kitchen the way she had done 100 times now, though it had only been a week. She opened the refrigerator and found eggs, butter, a carton of milk. She did not ask permission. She simply started cooking, the familiar rhythm of it calming her own nerves as much as anything. Behind her, she heard Vivienne exhale, long and slow. "You don't have to do that," Vivienne said. "I know." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that had become ordinary, the kind that said, "We are both thinking about the same thing, and neither of us wants to say it first." Laurel sangrilled the eggs, slid them onto 2 plates. She set one in front of Vivienne, who was sitting at the small kitchen table with her coffee untouched. "Eat," Laurel said. Vivienne looked at the plate, then up at Laurel. For a moment, her face was unguarded, stripped of the composure she wore like armor. What if she says something that changes everything? Laurel sat down across from her. Like what? "I don't know. That she wants to live with her birth mother again. That she doesn't want to be adopted at all. That she's been pretending to be happy because she thinks that's what we want to hear." Each sentence landed like a small stone dropped into still water. Laurel let them settle before she spoke. "Then we figure it out," she said. "Whatever she says, we listen. We don't panic. We don't make it about us." "That's the thing." Vivienne's voice was quiet. "Everything about this feels like it's about us, her interview, her future, her happiness, and I keep thinking, what if I'm not the person she needs? What if I've been so focused on doing this right that I've missed what she actually needs?" Laurel reached across the table. She did not take Vivienne's hand. She simply placed her own hand palm up, an offering, not a demand. "You're here," she said. "That's the thing she needs. You keep showing up. That's more than most people ever get." Vivienne stared at Laurel's hand for a long moment. Then she placed her own hand on top of it, light and tentative. "I don't know how to do this," Vivienne admitted. "I've never had to care about someone else's happiness more than my own. I don't know if I'm built for it." "None of us know," Laurel said. "You just do it anyway. You make mistakes, you apologize, you try again. That's what caring looks like. It's not a skill you're born with. It's a choice you make over and over." Vivienne's fingers tightened around Laurel's hand. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's just worth it." They sat like that for a moment, hand in hand across the kitchen table, the eggs growing cold between them. Then Vivienne pulled back, picked up her fork, and took a bite. Laurel did the same. Neither of them mentioned the warmth that lingered where their hands had touched. The drive to the county office took 20 minutes. Vivienne drove with both hands on the wheel, her jaw set. Laurel kept her gaze fixed on the passing streets, suburban houses giving way to office parks, and then the low, bureaucratic building where Maya's future would be decided. They arrived 10 minutes early. The parking lot was nearly empty. In the corner, a woman in a tan coat sat on a bench, fingering a clipboard.
Laurel recognized her as the social worker from the first meeting, though she looked different now, softer, or maybe just tired.
Vivienne Hartley and Laurel Chen? The woman asked, standing.
Yes, Vivienne said.
Is Maya? She's inside already. She asked for you both.
The social worker smiled, a small, tired smile.
She's been telling me about the garden you planted, and the pancakes, and the cat named Toast who lives next door, apparently.
Laurel felt something loosen in her chest.
She's okay? She seems happy. That's a good sign.
The social worker glanced at her clipboard. I'll bring her out in a few minutes. We'll do a joint session first, and then I'll speak with her alone. Standard procedure. You'll be able to see her after. Vivienne nodded, her face unreadable. Laurel touched her arm, just below the elbow.
Hey,
Laurel said quietly. We've got this. Vivienne looked at her, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Underneath it, Laurel saw fear, raw and real and unguarded. I don't know if I can do this, Vivienne said, barely above a whisper. You don't have to know, Laurel said. You just have to be here. And you are. That's enough. They stood together in the empty parking lot, the gray sky pressing down on them. Laurel did not take Vivienne's hand. She did not need to. They were standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough that Laurel could feel the tension radiating off Vivienne's body. A door opened behind them. Mama Viv! Laurel! Maya came running across the parking lot, her backpack bouncing, her face split in a grin that reached her eyes. She threw herself at Vivienne first, who caught her and held her, her eyes squeezed shut. Hey, sweetheart, Vivienne said, her voice rough. Did you bring the picture? From the garden? Maya pulled back, looking hopeful. In the car, Laurel said. I have them. Good, because I told Miss Patricia about the tomatoes and she didn't believe me. Maya grabbed Laurel's hand and Vivienne's hand, pulling them both toward the building. Come on, I want to show you my drawing of Toast. I did it in therapy. Laurel let herself be pulled, her hand warm in Maya's small grip. Beside her, Vivienne was walking with the same determined stride, but her hand was trembling slightly. The interview was scheduled for an hour. Maya went inside first with the social worker, waving over her shoulder. Laurel and Vivienne sat in the waiting room, side by side, the silence between them thick with everything unsaid. Laurel picked up a magazine, put it down. Vivienne stared at the door Maya had disappeared through. She called me Mama Viv, Vivienne said finally. I heard. I didn't know she called me that. She just started doing it a few weeks ago. I didn't correct her. Vivienne's voice was quiet, almost wondering. I didn't want to correct her. Laurel looked at her profile, the straight line of her nose, the way her jaw was still tight. What does it feel like? Vivienne was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Like something I didn't know I wanted until I had it, and now I'm terrified of losing it. Laurel reached over and took Vivienne's hand. This time she did not let go. Whatever happens in there, Laurel said, you're not losing her, and you're not alone in this. I'm here. We're both here. Vivienne turned to look at her, and in that moment the distance between them seemed to collapse. Laurel could see the fear in her eyes, but she could also see something else, something softer, something that looked almost like hope. The door opened. The social worker stepped out, a folder in her hand. Her face was neutral, unreadable. Ms. Hartley, Ms. Chen, she said. Can you come in? Maya would like to talk to you both. Vivienne's grip on Laurel's hand tightened. Laurel squeezed back. They stood up together, moving toward the door, stepping into the unknown. The gray light through the window fell across the small conference room where Maya sat, her drawing of a calico cat in her lap. She looked up at them, and her smile was bright and real. I told her about everything, Maya said. The garden, the pancakes, Toast, the way you both tuck me in at night, even though I'm too old for it. She paused, her grin widening. And I told her I want to live with both of you. Forever. Is that okay? The room went very quiet. Laurel felt tears prick her eyes. Beside her, Vivienne made a small, broken sound. That's more than okay,
Vivienne said, her voice
rocking. That's everything. Across the table, the social worker smiled and wrote something down. Laurel did not see what it was. She was too busy watching Vivienne, who was looking at Maya with an expression Laurel had never seen before, open and raw and full of something that looked like love. And in that moment, Laurel realized the question she had been carrying for weeks had finally found its answer. She was not just here for Maya anymore. She was here for Vivienne, too. The drive back from the agency was silent in a way that felt fragile, like one wrong word might shatter whatever spell had been cast in that interview room. Laurel kept her eyes on the road, but her attention was fixed on the woman in the passenger seat, Vivienne, who had not spoken since they walked out of the building with the social worker's parting words still echoing between them. "Conditional approval," Vivienne finally said, her voice flat. 6 months of supervised co-parenting, then a final review. If everything goes well, Maya becomes ours, officially. Laurel nodded slowly. She'd expected relief to flood her chest, but instead she felt something heavier settling there, the weight of what ours actually meant. Beside her, Vivienne pressed her palm against the window, her rings catching the afternoon light. "That's good," Laurel said carefully. "That's really good, Vivienne." "It is." Vivienne's voice was still flat, almost mechanical. "She'll be ours, we'll be hers. And then what? We become 2 people who share a child and nothing else? 2 strangers who happen to be raising the same girl?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable. Laurel gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the familiar ache of wanting to say something true and not knowing how to begin. She pulled the side, thinking through a quiet parking lot near the river, cut the engine, and turned to face Vivienne fully. "What happened to you?" Laurel asked gently. "Not today, not with Maya. Before all of this, what made you so sure you're not capable of being loved?" Vivienne flinched like the question had physically struck her. For a long moment she said nothing. Her jaw worked, her throat bobbed, and Laurel almost took the question back, almost filled the silence with an apology. But then Vivienne spoke, and the words came out raw and unpolished, like they had been buried for years. "I was engaged once, 7 years ago. Her name was Celeste." Vivienne's voice was barely above a whisper. "She was brilliant and warm, and she made me feel like I didn't have to be perfect all the time. We planned a future. A house in Vermont, 2 dogs, maybe kids. I let myself believe I could have that." Laurel stayed perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the thread of Vivienne's confession. 3 months before the wedding, she told me she couldn't do it anymore, that living with me was like living with a marble statue, beautiful to look at, impossible to touch. She said I was so afraid of being vulnerable that I made everyone around me feel invisible. Vivienne's laugh was hollow, brittle. And the worst part? She was right. I didn't fight for her. I just nodded, told her I understood, and let her walk away. I've been proving her right ever since. The silence that followed was thick with years of unspoken pain. Laurel felt her own chest tighten, recognizing something achingly familiar in Vivienne's words. The fear of being seen, the habit of pushing people away before they could leave on their own terms. "That's not true," Laurel said quietly. "What she said about you. I've watched you with Maya. I've watched you learn to let her in, to let yourself need her. That's not the behavior of someone who can't be touched. That's someone who's been hurt and is terrified of being hurt again." Vivienne turned to look at her, eyes glistening. "And what about you? Why do you keep showing up for me like this? You don't owe me anything, Laurel. We were strangers 6 months ago." "Because I see you." Laurel's voice shook, but she didn't look away. "I see the woman who showed up at my door at midnight because Maya had a nightmare and you didn't know what else to do. I see the woman who learned to make pancakes because a 9-year-old asked for them. I see the woman who's terrified of being left and I want to stay anyway." Vivienne's breath caught. "Laurel, I'm in love with you." The words tumbled out before Laurel could stop them, raw and unguarded. "I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. But somewhere between the foster care meetings and the Sunday dinners and the way you look at Maya like she hung the moon, I fell in love with you. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend this is just about co-parenting anymore." The confession landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Vivienne stared at her, eyes wide and unreadable. Laurel felt her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting for the rejection she was sure would come. But instead of pulling away, Vivienne reached across the center console and took Laurel's hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but she held on like Laurel was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "I don't know how to do this," Vivienne whispered. "I don't know how to let someone in without waiting for them to leave. But I want to try. With you. For the first time in 7 years, I want to try." Laurel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She squeezed Vivienne's hand, feeling the warmth slowly returning to those carefully guarded fingers. "That's all I'm asking for," Laurel said softly. "One step at a time. We figure it out together." Vivienne's eyes glistened, and then she did something Laurel had never seen her do before. She smiled. Not the polished, professional smile she wore like armor, but something real and uncertain and achingly vulnerable. "Together," Vivienne repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "I think I could get used to that." They sat there in the quiet parking lot, hands intertwined while the river rushed past and the afternoon light turned golden. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The truth had finally been spoken and it had set them free. Later that evening, they picked up Maya from her after-school program. The girl came running out with her backpack bouncing and her braids flying, launching herself at both of them like she always did. But this time, something felt different. This time, when Laurel caught Vivienne's eye over Maya's head, there was a new understanding passing between them, a quiet promise that this was just the beginning. "Guess what?" Maya announced, pulling back to look at them both. "I drew a picture of our family today. It's me and you," she said, pointing at Laurel, then Vivienne. "And toast. And a really big garden with sunflowers." Vivienne knelt down, her voice gentle. "Can we see it?" Maya fished a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack and unfolded it proudly. The drawing was messy and bright, 3 stick figures holding hands, a blob that was clearly toast, and rows of enormous yellow sunflowers towering over them all. "See?" Maya said, pointing at the tallest figure. "That's you," Maya. "Not a thief." "And that's Mama Laurel." "And that's me in the middle. We're all holding hands so nobody gets lost." Laurel felt her throat tighten. Beside her, Vivienne made a soft sound, not of pain this time, but of wonder. "Nobody's going to get lost," Vivienne said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise." Maya looked between them, her grin widening. "Does this mean you're both staying? Like, for real?" Laurel reached out and took Vivienne's hand, feeling her fingers curl around hers naturally, like they had always belonged there. "For real," Laurel said, "for as long as you'll have us." Maya threw her arms around both of them, and the 3 of them stood there in the schoolyard, tangled together in a hug that felt like the beginning of something permanent. In the distance, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Laurel looked over Maya's head at Vivienne, and for the first time, she saw no fear in those careful eyes, only hope, fragile and new, but there nonetheless. The road ahead was uncertain. There were still 6 months of supervised visits and final reviews and the 1,000 small challenges of becoming a family. But in that moment, with Maya's arms around them and Vivienne's hand in hers, Laurel knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. 6 months passed the way all seasons do when you are busy building a life. Laurel stopped counting the days between visits and started counting them the way you count the rings on a tree, by the small, solid things that accumulated. A pink toothbrush next to a blue one in the bathroom, a basket of mismatched socks that never seemed to sort itself out, the particular creak of Maya's bedroom door at 6:47 every morning, followed by the thump of small feet and the smell of strawberry toothpaste. A social worker, Diane, made her rounds every 6 weeks. She sat in the living room with her clipboard and her patient smile, asking questions that sounded simple but never were. How is Maya sleeping? How is school going? How are the 2 of you managing differences in parenting style? Laurel learned to read between the lines. This is a test. This is all a test. Vivienne handled the interviews with the same composure she brought to board meetings, which Diane found both impressive and faintly amusing. The first time she asked Vivienne about her childhood, Laurel watched her grip the armrest of the sofa, knuckles going pale,
but she answered. She talked about her grandmother's garden and the silver ring she still wore on her right hand, the one with the tiny forget-me-not that had belonged to a woman who loved flowers more than people but loved her anyway. After Diane left that day, Laurel found Vivienne standing in the kitchen, staring out the window at the rain. "Are you okay?" Laurel asked. Vivienne turned and there was something raw in her face, something unguarded and young. "I think I just told a stranger more about my childhood than I've ever told anyone. How did it feel?" Vivienne considered the question, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. "Like taking off a coat I'd forgotten I was wearing. Strange. Light." Laurel crossed the kitchen and took her hand, and Vivienne let her, the way she had been letting her more and more. It was a small miracle, Laurel thought, the way someone who had spent 7 years building walls could learn to leave the door unlocked. Maya was the one who made them brave. She was the one who drew the family portrait that hung on the refrigerator, the one with 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun. She was the one who announced at dinner one night that her teacher had asked the class to draw their families, and she had drawn all 3 of them, plus Toast. And no, she hadn't thought about it. Why would she think about it? They were her family, weren't they? Laurel's throat tightened. Vivienne's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Of course we are, baby," Laurel said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Of course we are." The night before the final review, Laurel couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, the small creaks and sighs of a home that had learned to hold 3 people. At some point, she heard footsteps in the hallway, and then Maya appeared in her doorway, a small shadow clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Mama, Laurel?" Maya's voice was small, uncertain. "Can I sleep in your bed? Just for tonight?" Laurel lifted the covers without a word, and Maya climbed in, curling against her side like a small animal seeking warmth. They lay in the dark for a long moment, Laurel's hand stroking Maya's hair. "Are you scared?" Maya asked. "Of what, honey?" "That the lady will say no, that we can't stay." Laurel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm not scared, baby, because whatever happens tomorrow, we're already a family. A piece of paper doesn't change that. It never could." Maya was quiet for a long time, her breathing slowing. Just when Laurel thought she had fallen asleep, she heard a small whisper. "I want it to be real, though. I want it to be official." "It will be, baby. I promise." Laurel lay awake long after Maya's breathing evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling. She heard the soft creak of the door and didn't need to look to know it was Vivienne. She felt the mattress dip, felt the warmth of another body settling beside her, felt Vivienne's hand find hers in the dark. "Couldn't sleep either?" Vivienne's voice was quiet, intimate in the darkness. Maya came in. "Ah." There was a pause. "I'm glad she has you. I think we have each other, actually." Vivienne's fingers tightened around hers. "Yes, I think we do." They lay there in the dark, Maya between them, a constellation of 3 small points of light in a quiet house. Laurel felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like certainty. The final review took place on a Thursday, in the same conference room where they had first met Diane months ago. The walls were the same beige, the chairs were the same uncomfortable plastic, but the people had changed. Laurel sat with her hands folded in her lap, Vivienne beside her, Maya between them, swinging her legs. Diane looked at them over her glasses, and Laurel could read nothing from her expression. She read through her notes, checked boxes, made small humming sounds. The clock on the wall ticked. "Okay," Diane said finally, setting down her pen. "There's a lot here, but I have to be honest with you. I've had my share of concerns over the past 6 months. Placing a child with 2 single adults who barely knew each other is not the kind of placement I would normally recommend." Laurel's stomach dropped. Beside her, Vivienne went very still. "However," Diane continued, and Laurel felt her breath catch, "I have also seen Maya's school reports. I have seen her teacher's notes about how much she has flourished. I have seen the drawings she brings home, the ones with 3 figures holding hands. I have watched the 2 of you turn into a family in front of my eyes." She looked at Maya, who was watching her with wide, serious eyes. "And I've talked to Maya. You know what she told me? She said she has 2 moms now, and that's what I think there's Devon. But my value. I am listently formed to grow there into the pentanate." Naya nodded solemnly. "And Mama Laurel makes pancakes with faces, and Mama Vivienne does the voices when we read." Diane smiled,
and it was the first real smile Laurel had seen from her. That's what I thought. So I'm recommending the adoption be finalized. Congratulations, you three. The room seemed to tilt. Maya let out a shriek of joy and launched herself at both of them, and Laurel found herself laughing and crying at the same time, her arms full of small girl and the woman she loved. Vivienne was crying too, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, and she didn't try to hide them. We did it, Laurel said, her voice thick. We actually did it. Vivienne pulled back just enough to look at her, and her eyes were bright, unguarded, full of light. She did it, Laurel. You did this. You showed me how. That's not true. Let me say this. Vivienne's voice was gentle but firm. 7 years ago, I told myself I wasn't capable of this. I told myself I was too broken, too cold, that love was something that happened to other people. And then you came along with your terrible cooking, and your messy hair, and your enormous heart, and you made me believe I could be more. Laurel's eyes burned. I just loved you. That's all I did. That was everything. Vivienne reached out and cupped her face in her hands, her gaze open and steady. You gave me a home, Laurel, you and Maya. I don't know how to thank you for that. Don't thank me. Laurel leaned into her touch, her voice breaking. Just stay. That's all I need. Forever, Vivienne said, and the word was a promise, a vow, a beginning. That evening they celebrated with takeout from Maya's favorite Chinese place, and a cake from the bakery on the corner that had become a Sunday tradition. Toast wandered through the living room, weaving between their legs, purring like a small motor. Maya fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie, her head on Laurel's lap, her feet on Vivienne's. Laurel looked around the room, the crayon drawings on the fridge, the mismatched furniture, the cat asleep in the sun, the woman she loved holding their daughter's feet like they were the most precious things in the world. This was the shape of a family, she thought. Not perfect, not planned, not anything like the picture in her head. Better, messier, real. Vivienne caught her eye across the room and smiled, a small, private smile that was just for her. Laurel smiled back, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by the sounds of a home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the soft breathing of a sleeping child, she understood something she had spent her whole life looking for. This was what it felt like to be home. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of it disappearing, because some things, she had learned, were built to last. Some things were built like families, stone by stone, heart by heart, held together not by blood or paperwork, but by the 1,000 small acts of choosing each other every single day. Laurel reached out and took Vivienne's hand across their sleeping daughter. The ring on Vivienne's finger caught the lamplight, a small silver flower, worn smooth by years of hope. Happy endings, Laurel whispered, aren't endings at all. Vivienne squeezed her hand. No, they're beginnings. And outside, the first stars came out over the quiet street, and the house held them all, 3 hearts, 1 family, a lifetime of beginnings ahead.
Sometimes, the universe's biggest mistakes give us exactly what we never knew we needed. We started as rivals, but ended up building a home together. I'd love to know where you're watching our story from. Drop your city or country in the comments below.